Hi, this is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. Let me start by talking about something that is a bit off topic, just a kind of note. If any of you want to respond to this in the comments section on YouTube, you are more than welcome to do so. I am used to speaking without a script. In my 44 years as a college professor, I didn't use a script. I always spoke off the top of my head. But if you think I'm doing a really lousy job at doing this, then please feel free to leave me a suggestion in the YouTube comments section, and I promise you that I will consider it. I can't make any guarantees, but I will consider it. Now let's get into today's topic. What I would like to discuss are ways to spread Marxism-Third Worldism or Maoism-Third Worldism. Again, call it what you like. I think we have a tremendous opportunity that people in most tendencies in Marxism simply don't have. And that is that we're weird. No, well, seriously, that is that we have an approach which is very, very different from most approaches, well, really from any other approach, to Marxism. So that can be used to our own benefit, I think. Since we put our focus on the third world, and obviously we're not the only ones to do that. Post-colonialists do that. People who are involved in subaltern analysis do that, and so on. So we certainly don't have a corner on that market. But I think we do the best job of it. And we have the most sophisticated and analytical approach to looking at the third world. So, here are just a few suggestions for how we might become effective proselytizers or converters to Maoism or Marxism-Third Worldism among the people that we meet every day. Now, I'm not suggesting that we walk up to people on the street and say, "Hi, I am your local Marxist or Maoist third worldist." No, that's not. I don't think that would be very, very helpful. Probably frighten kids away, and maybe they'd even call the police on us. So, what should we do then? Well, for one thing, I think that we could begin by pointing out the uniqueness of our tendency, of our perspective. And again, that is that we recognize that Marxism, Marxist communism in particular, has basically failed. Every attempt to establish a communist state has basically failed. Now, there are a few remnants, possibilities in some parts of the world, maybe still Cuba, although I'm becoming increasingly doubtful of Cuba. Other places, of course, Vietnam officially calls itself communist, but really it's not. China, of course, calls itself communist, but really it's not. So there really aren't that many places that even call themselves communist anymore. I guess you could argue that the Juche people in North Korea are somewhat communist. However, if you actually read, as I have, their statement of principles, what they say is that, well, we are somewhat sympathetic to Marxism-Leninism, but we are not Marxist-Leninists. In fact, it's not even clear whether they consider themselves to be Marxists. So that is perhaps somewhat confusing. I have a lot of respect for the history of North Korea, for the fact that the Democratic People's Republic of Korea has stood up to the United States and is continuing to do so. Not many countries are daring enough to do that. Most countries, I think, that even consider that quickly change their minds, knowing how much of a threat we are to the rest of the world. We are literally, in the United States, the only country to have ever used nuclear weapons on another country, Japan, of course, and yet we are so concerned about other countries like North Korea developing nuclear weapons. A bit hypocritical, in my opinion. But I think that what we can do is we can emphasize the fact that we, as Marxist or Maoist third worldists, place our emphasis on the third world and upon building communism in the third world. Common objection, which I would get all the time from my students, because on the first day of class I would always tell my students that I was a commie, and I would say commie. I would always tell my students that I was a Marxist commie, so I would not be confused with an anarcho-communist. And I would get mixed reactions. Some people had this look of horror on their faces. Some people had smiled. I'm not sure if the smile was necessarily pleasure or if it was likewise a feeling of terror and fright, and smiling was better than yelling. But regardless, I've always been open about being a Marxist. One of the most common objections that I would get from people is this: Marxism has been tried, communism has been tried all over the world, and it's always collapsed. There's never been really a successful, long-standing communist government. That is partially, not entirely true, but that argument certainly does have some merit. I can certainly understand why a person would say that. I would like to see communism, for example, be successful here in the United States, or here in North America in general. That does not seem likely to happen anytime soon. So I can understand why people would say that, and people would look back at the Cold War, would look back at Mikhail Gorbachev and would say, look, Gorbachev basically gave up, and he basically conceded that the West, that NATO, had won the Cold War. And basically he did. That's exactly what Gorbachev did, which is why a lot of people don't like Gorbachev that much. But bear in mind that Gorbachev did that because the West, the First World, had essentially bankrupted them. They really had no ability to continue to spread communism in the former Soviet Union. Now, whether they would have lasted till now, till 2023, I have no idea. But at the time anyway, it really was not feasible, in my view, for the Soviet Union to have continued. Perhaps that's unfortunate. It gave kind of unfettered power to NATO, made NATO the only alliance of any power in the world. The Warsaw Pact disintegrated, and so the world has become very dangerous, mostly because the United States is very dangerous. I live in a very dangerous country, and I recognize that. People who say America is the greatest country in the world, yeah, we're the greatest at imposing terror on the rest of the world. That we're certainly good at. But we are a country here in the United States in which there's a lot of fear of communism. That perhaps was manifested most clearly back in the 1950s during the Army McCarthy hearings, when a lot of people were accused, quote unquote accused, of being communists. When they lost their jobs, they had no more careers left. one person in particular who was a panelist on the old TV quiz show, What's My Line, actually committed suicide when the Army McCarthy hearings accused him of being a communist. He spent a long time living in isolation and then ultimately took his own life. So, communism in the West, communism in the world, till this point has not been that successful. But I think that if we turn the attention away from the West, away from the global North, away from the First World, and to the Third World, the global South, that we might begin to look at things in a somewhat different way. And we might have an answer to people who make that objection that communism is a failure. We can say, well, yeah, maybe. Let's just assume for the sake of argument that you are true. What I believe in is different in many respects from what has been called communism in the future, meaning I believe that communism needs to be established in the Third World. Now, whether the First World will eventually join in can be a matter of conjecture. But communism needs to be established in the Third World first. And not just part of the Third World, in my view. The entire Third World. That needs to be at the heart of our objectives, at the heart of our conversations. Now, will that make any difference? Probably not. The First World, the global North, will eventually collapse, regardless of whether I say anything or not. What happens afterwards is a matter of conjecture. I hope that the Third World rises up and begins to establish communism. But there are no guarantees. The only guarantee we have is that the process of the dialectic, which is leading to the collapse of the capitalist world system, will continue to play out. So that's the way that I would begin by promoting Marxism or Maoism Third Worldism, is to stress that no, what we are doing is we are taking the emphasis off of the First World, because we, like you, recognize that communism so far has not been the smashing success that Karl Marx predicted it would be. In fact, Karl Marx actually thought that the first revolutions would occur in Europe toward the ends of the 19th century. Now, 19th century is not 1900s, it's 1800s. So that was a long time ago, 130, 140 years ago, whatever. Never happened. Marx was wrong. Marx was not a prophet. He was just a guy, just an ordinary human being, born in Germany, lived there for the first half of his life, then with his friend Friedrich Engels migrated to London and spent the rest of their lives living there. Okay, so that's point number one, to emphasize the uniqueness of Marxism or Maoism Third Worldism. The second thing is something that I personally do, and I have no idea whether it is successful or self-defeating. You can decide that for yourself. I will commonly introduce myself to people with a smile on my face, so people aren't frightened away or don't think that they are in danger of being stabbed or something, as the most radical person in the Rio Grande Valley, where I live. When I lived in Kansas, I would do the same thing. I would call myself the most radical person living in Johnson County, Kansas. When I was living in New York City, I never said that. I don't know why. Maybe I should have, but it never crossed my mind. Same thing living in Georgia and Virginia. Never crossed my mind. But I did start saying that in Kansas, and I've continued saying that here. And I think that statement in and of itself is somewhat intriguing, or might be intriguing. What do you mean you're the most radical person living here in the lower Rio Grande Valley. Well, what I mean is that my view is that the first world needs to be completely wiped out of existence. Now, I don't know if that'll happen, but that is my view at this point. Although, again, with reservations. But I don't add that reservations part to it. I just say my view is the first world will be wiped out of existence, and communism will be established in the third world. What could possibly be more radical than that? So by saying that, I am not just puffing, like puffing a cigar. I don't smoke cigars. I'm not just puffing, I'm actually making a substantive point that communism is something which we should each own, and we should each regard ourselves as extreme radicals. Don't be afraid of the word radical. Don't be afraid of the word revolutionary. Use those terms, but use them in a positive, upbeat way, saying, well, I'm the most radical. I'm the person most in favor of an eventual revolution. I think that might be successful. So that is basically all I wanted to say for now. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. Have a good day, a good evening, or whatever time it is in the part of the world in which you happen to live. Bye-bye.